please pay attention to this because there has been a disturbing spike in threats of political violence across the country. We have seen direct threats to members of Congress, local leaders, and judges. And members of both parties have been targeted by what's known as swatting. That's when somebody calls 911 to trick heavily armed SWAT teams into descending on the target's home. And as we told you last night, two key figures in the Trump trials have been victims of those very calls recently. And to be clear, these aren't harmless pranks. In 2017, a feud between online gamers led to one of them making a swatting call targeting a Kansas address. It ended in a police shooting and killing of a man at a home that wasn't even involved. The man who made the swatting call got 20 years in prison. Back with me tonight to discuss, NBC News tech correspondent, my dear friend Jake Ward. Jake, you have spent a lot of time looking into swatting. I want to understand, what is it like for the victims the next day after these things happen?
Well, it is deeply, deeply traumatizing, Steph. I spent time with one couple in Milwaukee who had been swatted more than 40 times. An armed police response came to their house more than 40 times. In some cases, dragging them out of bed in the middle of the night, you know, with no clothes on, throwing them on the ground, pointing guns at them. I mean, the sensation for the victims here is one very much of, you know, not just total bewilderment, but absolute terror as you try to explain to armed police officers who have been convinced that you're in there doing something terrible or that some life or death situation is present at the house. You know, you're trying to convince them not to kill you. It's a terrible, terrible thing. And it becomes even more horrible stuff because it's really the sort of perfect piece of civil sabotage, because police, as we have learned in speaking to law enforcement across the country, are really, you know, legally responsible for showing up at any presumed emergency, ready for the emergency that's been phoned in. There's not really an option of not coming or just, you know, saying, oh, we're just crying wolf here, and as a result, not showing up. You have to show up in some form. But police officers, you know, across the country have been telling us we're just not really trained for this yet, and there is no national system for letting people know, hey, this is a place that has been, you know, victimized in the past, and as a result, you just have police having to show up again and again with guns drawn, and as a result, it's just, you know, really decaying the whole fabric of trust, not just between, you know, us and the police, but between police and us. I mean, it really creates a tremendous problem, and there's really very little national coordination getting their arms around this right now. There's a little bit of effort on the part of the FBI to try and get law enforcement to talk to one another, but at this point, the response here, the trying to get out in front of this thing, is years behind the coordinated online groups who do this kind of thing for sports stuff.
Jake, one other problem that has arisen, some public officials who are facing this aren't speaking about it. There was a judge, I want to say it was in Wisconsin, who I saw a headline, they're urging other public officials who've been targeted to speak up, saying that if they don't, quote, we will lose the battle for democracy to a bunch of insurrectionists. Help me understand this. What is that decision like for public figures, whether or not they should speak up about this?
You know, it's incredibly difficult to sort out the right response to this, because the truth of the matter is, as we dug deeper into the experience of multiple families across the country, there is a true coordinated subculture online of people who do this kind of thing, phoning in these fake 911 calls for fun. They pick someone seemingly at random oftentimes and just decide to make their life hell. And the more that other people speak up about it, the more they become victims as well. Now, you mentioned this Kansas case in which a man got 20 years for having done this. That's a very unusual thing. By and large, the people who do swatting get away with it because the law has not really caught up with this. And so that's why public officials may feel that they don't want to speak out, because they're worried about drawing the attention of these online subcultures who right now do not have much of a chance of being punished in the way that you and I, looking at this horrible outcome for the victims, would assume should be the case in a court of law, Steph.
We've also seen people taking advantage of swatting incidents to spread misinformation online, which can basically be impossible to get rid of and has long-lasting consequences. Is there any recourse for the victims?
You know, the biggest recourse right now is just trying to get both, I think, police departments trained up to recognize these things ahead of time. You know, Marjorie Taylor Greene, you mentioned, has been the victim of swatting. She mentioned in an online post that her police department now knows not to send people to her house. But, you know, unless you're a member of Congress, you're not going to get that kind of treatment. And so for your average person, they need their local jurisdiction to get sort of, you know, get it together and understand a little bit about how this works. But in the courts, we also need a way to be able to look at, you know, an online subculture and say, hey, you know, when these guys get together and coordinate a swatting attack, it's not just a First Amendment exercise. It's not protected by Section 230. In fact, it's just like screaming fire in a crowded movie theater, in many cases much worse. So you're right. The weaponization of sort of distrust and conspiracy and the rest of it, all that is terrible. And in swatting, I think it's really found kind of its perfect form, Steph.